yes, we'll start. I'm glad you're here.
Attention faculty. The faculty meeting is starting in the atrium in 2 minutes. Please get to the atrium for faculty meeting. Thank you.
For some of you who don't know me, my name is Donald Johnson. Most of you are in my class or see me. I teach upstairs. Today we have the honor of having Mr. John Mejia here to speak to us. A little bit of background about John. He grew up here in Salt Lake City. Then he went to Brown University, and eventually he earned his law degree from the University of Chicago. And he's always been actively involved in the community, and one of the areas that he likes to work with is young people. He eventually came back to Salt Lake in 2012, where he's currently the legal director of the ACLU of Utah. And myself and my husband were lucky enough to meet John in March of this year when we became involved in the Evans versus Utah lawsuit. And I'm sure he'll talk about that a little bit. So I'm very honored to have him here today, and I'd like to introduce you to Mr. John Mejia.
Thank you very much. So just to start out a little bit about what the ACLU of Utah is. We are a nonprofit organization, and we're committed to defending the civil rights of everybody in Utah. We work towards promoting equality. That would mean equality of people of all race and ethnic backgrounds, LGBT people, all people in Utah. And we rely almost entirely on donations and membership dues to fund our efforts. Some people ask if we take money from the government, and I like to say we take money from the government when I beat them in court and force them to pay me, because if we took money, of course, from the government, then that's basically who we sue, and we can't have limits on how we sue, and if we bring a legal action, we couldn't. We need to retain our independence. So we're kind of a small office. We have 2 full-time lawyers, an executive director, we have a lobbyist, and then a few staff people. So we're small, but we're sort of able to make a big impact because we have a big microphone. So, and it's a very big mission, as you can imagine, promoting civil rights and equality, the Bill of Rights and all that stuff. It's a very, wide goal. So we sort of break down our efforts into sort of 3 different ways of doing that, or 3 main ways of sort of advancing our goals. The first is to educate the public about their rights and important issues around their rights, and that would be an example of that would be what I'm doing here today. Another example would be, if you guys were to want to stage a protest, like there was, when the Hobby Lobby decision came out, and Hobby Lobby wanted to deny some of its women employees contraception based on Hobby Lobby's religious beliefs. There was a group of protesters who wanted to go and protest Hobby Lobby for doing that, and so we could tell the protesters what their rights are. For example, don't go and you can stand on the sidewalk and walk along the sidewalk because you have the right to be there, but don't go into the private property without permission, for example. So we can sort of educate people about their rights in that way. And then we also have different sort of events that promote awareness. For example, and this might be of interest to you, we sort of nationwide and in Utah are very concerned about there's a phenomenon that we call the school-to-prison pipeline. And there's a trend across the nation of high schools and other educational institutions that seem to have policies that are sort of more designed to push kids out of school and towards the correctional system. We prefer that all kids would continue in high school and hopefully go to college, but there's a group of policies and practices that we see that we call the school-to-prison pipeline. Zero tolerance, for example, where you don't give kids a chance to make mistakes and make amends. And sort of, we see things like very strict, dress codes, and saying that this is gang attire and that's gang attire, and if you look like that, we're going to sort of steer you towards prison or the jail system or correctional people. We work to sort of break up what we view as the school to prison pipeline, and this week is actually a week of action on school to prison pipelines. The news isn't really out there because we're getting the news cycle sort of around marriage equality, but I have flyers for an event next week about the school to prison pipeline, and there's going to be an open mic and all sorts of opportunities for people to talk and learn about it. So I have flyers if you're interested that I'll leave here. So that's, I usually don't go to those because they're on the weekends, but we have young people that do go to those. So that second way that we work to promote civil rights is to influence official government policies that affect people's rights. And if you think about it, there are policies that affect your life every single day at a lot of levels. I don't know if you thought about this, but it would just start with for example, your school and your school's policies. You can be subject to all sorts of punishments here or consequences here. So if we see school policies that we see as problematic, we will talk to administrators or work with school districts and school administrators to change those. For example, as I said before, what we would view as very vague guidelines on what they see as gang attire. And that can go up to the school district as well. So that's one of the, for you guys, school and school district policies, and then sort of going up from there, city and state policies that would affect your rights. I'll just give an example. And like I said before, we have a full-time lobbyist who goes to the state legislature and tries to either pass or help defeat laws that we view as problematic. And I'll just give you an example of a state law that we helped to change recently. I don't know if you guys have seen the footage from Ferguson where they have those tanks and the people dressed in full military gear with those big rifles. That's what we like to call militarization of the police, where the police who are supposed to be actually talking to people and not making people feel like enemies, actually get all of this military equipment and use these military tactics and start to make it feel like a war on the streets. And we're really concerned about that. I mean, Ferguson was one big example, but you hear about in this state about all sorts of SWAT raids, and you ask afterwards, why would you go on a SWAT raid for a couple of pot plants, for example, Ogden, that have, there was a very infamous example of the SWAT team going in over a few pot plants, and an officer ended up dying, and a lot of people ended up getting shot. And our question after that was, are those policies really necessary, or are those policies that we can change? How can we get state laws that would react, that could help prevent that sort of situation in the future? So our main lobbyist helped the state legislature come up with a policy that limits the situations where the police are going to be able to use that sort of enormous use of force, especially when it comes to that sort of use of force to just go get evidence of a crime rather than sort of a situation where we think a SWAT team might be appropriate, like if somebody's holding a gun to somebody's head. We don't want to limit police altogether and their ability to do that sort of thing, but we want to work towards a situation where the police are using the right amount of force necessary in the right circumstances. And then, another example of that would be our lobbyists. I mean, every year we've tried this, and it looks like this year it might actually, pass. But, for example, the non-discrimination acts. So there's a lot of cities in Utah that have passed non-discrimination acts that don't allow people to discriminate in housing or employment and public accommodations for people based on their sexual orientation. Basically, there are places in Utah where it's not against the law to fire somebody or to deny somebody housing because of their sexual orientation. And so we're working to change that. We're working to get non-discrimination acts passed statewide. Very interesting that there's going to be a Republican from St. George running that legislation again. because in Utah, obviously, if you want to get anything passed, you have to work across both sides of the aisle. So that's just another example of where the ACLU is pushing to get equality among all of society through different laws. And then the last way that we work towards equality and civil rights is my job, which is suing the government. And it's, to me, that's sort of the funnest thing because, you know, you can, well, I'm a lawyer, as you probably have figured out, and it's really kind of fun to argue and to, you know, while we got, you know, I settle most of my cases. Usually we start winning for a while, the other side realizes that we're going to win, and we settle, which means it goes outside of the court. But, you know, the fight is really interesting and worth it. And I just wanted to discuss today a few cases about, that we have with high school students. I'll start with the high school students student cases, just as illustrating the kind of work that we do. So the first case happened in the late 1990s. It was in East High School, and the students there decided to form a GSA, which is a Gay Straight Alliance. And you know, that's an extracurricular club, and they formed the club, and the first thing that East High School did was to say that the club was not allowed. And then, so we had to fight to establish that the club had First Amendment rights, that the kids had the right to express their opinion, that there should be equality among students, no matter what your sexual orientation. And then when we got that ruling, the Salt Lake School District decided that it would have no extracurricular activities. So they shut everything down. But the problem with that is that they did not shut everything down. And there's a federal law that says that if a high school allows any clubs to meet, any extracurricular clubs to meet, they can't start discriminating among clubs. So, you know, because East High and the Salt Lake School District did not like the Gay Straight Alliance, they claimed to be shutting down all clubs, but then they made all sorts of exceptions for different clubs, saying, well, you know, the debate club is really not extracurricular, and that club isn't extracurricular. So we had to bring a case that said, yes, those clubs really are extracurricular, and you need to grant the GSA equal access. And you're punishing really all kids because of your own, you know, prejudices against the GSA, because they did genuinely shut down a lot of the extracurricular clubs. So that was an example of a case where, at the end of the day, the school district did the right thing. They reversed themselves and allowed the GSAs. But the Gay Straight Alliance is actually an issue that continues to be a problem in Utah because, you know, the school administrators, whenever a high school decides to start, the kids at a high school decide to start a Gay Straight Alliance, you know, they're not like me and they don't have all the case files, you know, in their office. They think that they need to reinvent the wheel. And, you know, just last year, for example, in Box Elder, somebody had tried to start a Gay Straight Alliance and had initially been told no. And then, you know, we went and talked to the school administration. There was a meeting, and very reluctantly, they allowed the Gay Straight Alliance to start in Box Elder. But it's a constant struggle because not all school administrators are really aware of students' rights or aware of, you know, for example, the need to allow Gay Straight Alliances to meet. Another case that we have involving high school students is ongoing, and it's called Winston versus the Salt Lake City Police Department. And this is a case, I don't know if any of you have actually read about it, but it was about 3 years ago at West High School, the gang unit, the school administration, and these are sort of public facts, I'm not sure exactly how it happened, but somebody from the school called the gang unit, the Metro gang unit, and said that you should come into West High School during school day, round up the kids that we say are gang members, and document and question them. So that's exactly what the gang task force did during just a regular school day. 19 or 20 police officers from the Salt Lake Metro Gang Task Force came and started rounding up kids on a list and taking them to the in-school detention room. The police also just decided to grab some kids that looked like gang members to them and bring them to the in-school detention room. And somehow, all of the kids who ended up in that room were either Pacific Islander or Hispanic kids. And so, yeah, right? So we brought a case saying, you know, you shouldn't be coming in. I mean, I can tell you all the legal theories, but at the end of the day, school is a special place. And while kids, it's true, your rights, and I hate to tell you this, but in school, your rights are not quite as strong as they are outside of school. But even with some sort of, you know, limits on kids' rights, they still have rights in school. School is it should be sort of sacred, right? And so we brought an action against the school district and the police, and all of the police involved, saying that that was wrong. And we're currently, you know, litigating that case, trying to get what we viewed as the problematic policies changed and get our clients some compensation for what we view as a violation of their rights. And then another sort of very timely case, or group of cases that we brought is, we bring a lot of cases that involve advancing the rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people, LGBT rights. And I think probably you all heard the news yesterday that there was Utah's ban on marriage between people of the same sex was struck down. And that was not a case that we brought in Utah, the ACLU brought in Utah, but the ACLU brought that case in a lot of different states across the country. And we won, I mean, and the people who were we refer this as marriage equality, right? If you're gonna let straight people marry, you're gonna have to let everybody marry. That position has won in almost every single court. Over 40 courts have upheld the right of everybody to marry. And yesterday, the Supreme Court refused to overturn any of those. The Supreme Court refused to even hear those cases, which means that the court decisions stand and marriage equality is a reality. But you know, the case that we brought for Don and Fritz and for 3 other people involve last December, Judge Shelby here in Utah said that Utah's ban on marriage between same-sex people was unconstitutional, and said you have to immediately start letting those folks get married. About 1,300 couples did immediately. They ran in, got their licenses, and got married. Unfortunately, a couple of weeks after that, the Supreme Court said you can stop. The state doesn't have to do that anymore. We're going to do what's called stay that order, and you know, the state can enforce its law again. And then so the state said, great, that means that we don't have to recognize, we don't have to treat as valid any of the marriages of the people who got married during that time period. Those 1,300 people, they're not really married because we get to enforce our ban again. And so we pretty much right after the state said that, put out a call to married people of the same sex and said, would you like to join a suit that tells the governor, you know, what to do with that kind of, you know, tells the governor he's wrong, he has to recognize your marriage. And Don and Fritz were 2 of the people who came forward among hundreds of others, because it's, you know, obviously if it's your marriage, you're going to fight for it, right? So we got, first we sued in state court to try to get an order from a state court to state officials to say you have to recognize those marriages. Those marriages are valid, just like anybody else's marriage. It's just a simple question of fairness. The state, for whatever reason, decided that they were going to go to federal court instead, and we got a very kind of conservative judge, crusty conservative judge named Judge Kimball. And we were actually kind of thrilled to have Judge Kimball, because even if you're crusty and conservative, you can understand equality, and you can understand that fair is fair. And so we knew that we had a good shot with that judge, because you just can understand, you know, you don't have to be super liberal or super progressive to understand simple concepts of constitutional guarantees and freedom. So we got Judge Kimball to order the state to recognize the marriages of those people who had been married, because the Supreme Court put a hold on it in January, but then sort of sat on its hands because they kicked it off to the circuit court, and then the circuit court was just sort of sitting on it as well. So we got that ruling, but unfortunately the Supreme Court stated again and said, again, those courts, the court and Judge Kimball on the 10th Circuit were just kidding. Utah, you still don't have to recognize those marriages. It doesn't matter if they were legally married in Utah, they're just gonna have to wait until this bigger issue gets sorted out. So we, still kicking and screaming the whole time, of course. But, I guess we had to, we have to accept what the court said. So we were, stuck until yesterday in this sort of holding pattern. Is the state going to have to recognize these people's marriages? Is the state going to have to treat these people with equal dignity as all other marriages? And that's the answer that we got yesterday from the court. Yes, you cannot ban marriages between people of the same sex because there is no rational basis to do so. And this is the interesting thing about this whole debate about equality, because you can sort of look at it in two ways. And I think both arguments win. You can either say, on the one hand, you can say that the Constitution guarantees equal protection of the laws. And to me, equal protection means that no matter who you are, you cannot discriminate, equal protection means that you can't discriminate against different groups of people without a good reason to do so. And in the case of banning marriage between people of the same sex, the state could not come up with a single good reason to do so. In Utah, for example, their supposedly good reason to ban marriage between people of the same sex was it's better for kids to have two straight parents, or a parent in their home that's a man and a woman. Well, they could not explain how stopping people of the same sex from marrying actually promoted any of the goals, or that goal, or any of the other goals that they were supposedly promoting with the ban. In fact, what they were doing was denying a lot of kids two parents, because another, Don and Fritz don't have the situation, but another couple of ours had an adopted son that they had been there since this guy's birth. And he was now 4 years old, but under Utah laws, only one of these parents was able to legally adopt their son. And so, not only did the state's ban on marriage of people of the same sex not promote two-parent households among, it actually stopped kids from having two parents. So it didn't really meet the supposed goal. So it fails under equal protection because you have to have, if you're going to discriminate, and sometimes you can, you have to have a good reason to do so, and this just simply was not. None of what the state was saying was their reasons for doing so actually were good reasons. So it failed to us on equal protection. And then what the 10th Circuit, what the ruling out of Utah says, is that marriage is a fundamental right. And when you have, it'd be like life, liberty, property, sort of the rights that you can't take away from people, that the government just can't deny somebody, again, without some excellent reason for doing so. And there really was no good reason for doing so here. This is what the court said, that marriage is a right, not marriage between a man and a woman is a right. Marriage itself is a right. And they had examples. There's another famous marriage case is, a warden of a prison decided that he was going to not allow inmates to marry, period, because he said so. And in response, the court said, no, marriage is a right. The warden doesn't get the right to decide this for these prisoners. They have the right to marry. So it's not the right for prisoners to marry. Another example, the right for you to marry somebody of a different race. And I don't know if you've heard about this case, but it was one of the leaders in this case. In the South, well, probably in a lot of states, but by like the 1950s, there were a lot of states in the South of America, in the American South, that banned marriages between people of different races. So there was a couple who had married in Washington, D.C. It was a white man and his African-American wife, and they moved to Virginia and got put in jail because they were married. And so, you know, the ACLU was among the lawyers that brought a case saying, that's, you know, you can't do that. You can't bar marriage between people of the same races. And the state, in that case, made a lot of the same arguments that they made against same-sex marriage. This hurts kids, interracial marriages. I mean, they never would say religion straight out, but, you know, there was always a religious aspect to these bans. And it was the same thing. Marriage is a fundamental right. You can't bar marriage based on, you know, if they're a prisoner, if you're different sex. It's just fundamental. And that's actually what the 10th Circuit said in this case here in Utah, is that you can't deny people their fundamental rights without a good reason, and they have no justification here that works. So I think that was a big victory for sort of everybody, right? Because at the end of the day, when any group of people is being denied a right, it really is a drag, and it really affects the rights of everybody, right? Because if they can do it to this particular group, what's to stop them from doing it to you, right? So every time we win a victory for the civil rights of one group, it's really a victory for everybody. And you know, this idea that, you know, by giving rights, same-sex couples the right to marry, you're sort of affecting the marriages of other people. I just can't understand. The history of the United States has always been more rights for more people, right? Like we started, you know, the United States started with certain people as slaves, right? And we got rid of that. And then, you know, when the country was founded, only certain people could vote. We got rid of that. You know, as the history of the United States has always been more rights for more people. So what happened yesterday, I think, is just a part of that like very strong tradition, and that's why people want to come here and, you know, enjoy our freedom and enjoy our civil rights. So that's the end of my spiel on our cases. And then one last thing I want to mention, because it's on the flyer. We, as part of our work, like to have, to recognize high school kids, high school seniors who work in their high schools and their communities to advance some sort of civil right. In the past, it's been, I mean, last year I think it was we've had lots of kids standing up for LGBT rights. We had a girl who was standing up for the right for a polygamous family to sort of not fear of criminal prosecution. You know, you name it. We've had editors of high school newspapers who stood up to administration. So anything that you guys have done, or if you know somebody who has advanced your rights or the rights of others, you can encourage them to apply for a scholarship that we have. I brought flyers for this as well. And then I have flyers for information about your rights as high school students within your high schools. And I'm also, you know, willing to answer any questions about that or anything, because we have, what, 5 minutes? 3 minutes?
So if somebody wanted to put together a protest over something, is it okay to call your office and get information about what they should and shouldn't do?
Yes.
Okay.
And we have Know Your Rights pamphlets too,
Okay.
so that if you don't want to bother to sit through training, you can give you a pamphlet.
What about this case of Bingham a couple of weekends ago, where those certain students were denied entrance into the Venus Prom?
I thought that, yeah. So I think and it always comes down to the facts, right? So they're allowed to have dress codes. The question can kind of become, were they enforcing the dress code in an arbitrary way or discriminatory way, right? So it was the same thing. I don't know if you guys saw the whole thing with the edited where they edited in certain pieces of clothing,
Yeah.
right? If they were just doing that to the girls, for example, that might get them into trouble with their federal funding because you can't treat boys and girls differently. So if, for example, they had studs being studs and they had the boys without their shirts and showing their underwear and stuff like that and let that go, but the girl who had a little bit too short of a cut here got airbrushed, there might be a problem. So, they can, schools of course can have dress, it's not they can't have dress codes, but they have to enforce them consistently and in a non-discriminatory way.
So each school could be separate in their dress code? I mean, you can have one school that has a kind of dress code.
That's kind of how it is.
Yeah, okay.
That's why it's kind of hard to BS sometimes, because, you hear about, well, here's this big problem that I know about, but then really when you get into it, it's that one problem with that one school, with that one administrator, like the examples of the police shootings, for example. We hear, well, why aren't you on police shootings? Well, the problem is, you're gonna have to look at the department, and you're gonna have to look at the police officer, and you're gonna have to look at the incident. So of course we're concerned that, there seems to be this rash of police officers shooting people without what seems like a good reason. But we can't go out and make these generalized statements or rush to judgment about any of it, because I don't think that's responsible either. You sort of lose your credibility if you sort of start to say, well, this incident, obviously the policeman was out of bounds because X, Y, Z. I don't really know what happened. I mean, there are situations where it's pretty clear, right? Like in Ferguson, there's eyewitnesses who said what happened, right? But unfortunately for us, while we're concerned about rights, it also involves a lot of legwork and a lot of trying to be responsible and look into things.
Are there any schools in Grant or Jordan or Canyons that has a gay straight alliance?
I think a lot of them do.
Really?
Yeah. It's, and I have a pamphlet about that too. And basically, this sort of anticipates that, well, it doesn't really anticipate that you might have problems, but it's information about getting it started. There's actually, after that whole thing, after the GSA club, they made a specific statute about how extracurricular clubs need to get formed. So we have information about that. So if anybody's interested in forming one here, I don't want to look at that. But I mean, if kids aren't interested in forming it, I'm you're not going to have one, but if you want one, you can definitely have one as long as there's other extracurriculars.
Anybody else have a question?
Hope I didn't bore you.
Oh, okay.
Alrighty, thank you.